Hi all, and welcome back to the neighborhood. After getting some positive reviews by other reviewers, I was pretty excited to get the Caspian in the house for a review from Apos Audio. In this case, Apos is not only the seller, but also the manufacturer. So how did Apos do with their first headphone? Let's get into it. Build-wise, I like a lot of what Apos has chosen to do here. First of all, one should note that this headphone was conceived in collaboration with the headphone maker Kinnarton Audio, and as such, Apos has chosen to mirror some of Kinnarton's design choices. In fact, I'd say that this headphone is somewhat of a Frankenstein, being made up of a number of parts of others. More specifically, the Caspian uses a 50mm Kinnarton driver, a balanced dual XLR connection, and has oak open-back wood cups like many of the Kinnarton cans. But unlike the Kinnarton headphones, Apos has chosen to go with an oval ear-shaped design rather than a round one. The headband is also different from other Kinnartons, and instead resembles more of the headband from a Beyerdynamic DT series headphone with additional padding up top. While I like this headband from a comfort perspective, I wish that Apos would have used the same material as the ear pads, as the material used in the headband is noticeably cheaper, and although it claims to be leather, it is definitely not as supple as the leather found on the ear cushions. In terms of the ear pads themselves, these are some of my favorites. The material is so soft to the touch and feels luxurious on my skin. If I could buy these pads separately for all of my headphones, at least from a fit and feel perspective, I probably would. The overall clamp on the Caspian is not intense, but these do feel bulkier on the head than they do in the hand. While they are somewhat light in their weight, they are also a bit rigid, which does wear a bit on my neck over the course of longer listening sessions. Some additional swivel or play in the yokes would have been appropriate here. These also come with a nice mini XLR to 1/4 inch cable that's decently thick and covered in a black cloth material. It's somewhat floppy, but it's not prone to memory and reminds me a lot of the non-detachable cables used in the Emu Teaks or early generation Fostex headphones, but unlike those sets, this cable is detachable here. A leather carrying bag is also included in the package. While this is a nice thought, it looks like a camcorder bag from the 1980s and is rather large, bulky, and devoid of any kind of style. The sound of the Caspians was somewhat unexpected. Note thickness varied with amplification, but this is a warm, dense, lush, and somewhat bassy sounding headphone at its core. For a single dynamic, there is a decent amount of sub-bass here, with a sub-bass emphasis to the overall bass response in general. It's not quite the low end of the Focal Elex, but it's leaning in that direction. While its bass does penetrate the overall mix to a small degree, the bottom end was mostly contained within the lower regions of the frequency response. The mid-range response on the Caspian is varied and uneven, with certain middle portions of the frequency response sounding more scooped or shallow than earlier or later regions. Vocals were affected by this inconsistency in the frequency response, and although male vocals could sound full and forward enough at times, male vocals, especially those with a leaner presentation to them, often sounded pushed back in the mix. In contrast, female vocals often came across as being pushed too far forward at times, with certain sharper female vocalists becoming overly dominant in the presentation. Guitar licks showed similar inconsistencies, as some licks normally in the background pushed their way forward with the Caspian, while others normally in the foreground faded more into the backdrop, leaving one's ears stretching to hear. Still, the treble response of the Caspians was perhaps this headphone's greatest struggle. The Caspian is dark, both in its tonality and in a traditional sense, meaning that the treble here lacks any real semblance of air, sparkle, or brilliance, and just kind of comes across as flat to the listener. There's also a definite but slight veil here, which begins in the mid-range and worsens in the treble. And while I know this is a dynamic set and not a planar magnetic one, the overall frequency response of the Caspian still kind of reminds me of something like an Audeze LCD2 Classic. So there might be a market here for the sonic profile of this kind of headphone, even if the tonality of the Caspian isn't exactly this reviewer's cup of tea. Still, while listening to this headphone, I can't help but think that the Caspian could have turned out more to my liking if some different design choices were made up front. For example, the choice of oak wood ear cups strikes me as a curious one. Oak tends to be a rather dense wood, and generally speaking, the greater density comes with a darker sound signature. And although I love the look and feel of the leather sheepskin ear pads, seriously, these may be some of my favorites ever. They are also likely contributing to the Caspian's darker tones as well. To me, perforated sheepskin ear pads and a less dense wood for the ear cups would have been a better choice from an auditory perspective. Such alternative choices would have allowed the Caspian some much needed breathing room, that is, if Apos were to ever consider a refresh at some point in time. Speaking of needing breathing room, adjustments such as this might have also improved the staging of the Caspian, as although the Caspian is an open back headphone, it surely doesn't sound like it. Instead, with the Caspian, one gets a rather intimate presentation, with a stage that is more analogous to a Sennheiser HD600 series than anything else. And like some may have complained about with the Sennheiser HD600 series, I found that the Caspian did also display an imaging problem that was rather blob-like as well. Furthermore, these images also tended to blur from blob to blob and weren't really what I would call precise. This resulted in a somewhat hazy image that tracked from left to right. Resolution, clarity, and detailing capabilities were also more akin to headphones in the $200 to $300 range than it was at the Caspian's price point at around $500 at the time of this review. So needless to say, the Caspian isn't really a technical headphone in its styling. And although a headphone doesn't have to be technical for this reviewer to enjoy it, the Caspian just had too many other flaws in addition for me to overlook its technicalities otherwise. Still, other reviewers seem to be willing to give this headphone more of a pass than I am, so your mileage could vary from an enjoyment perspective with the Caspian here. It's also always possible that the Caspian just didn't mesh well with my gear that I had in-house at the time for this review. For me, the best experience that I had with the Caspian came when it was driven off the Dark Voice 336 with a Japanese Raytheon preamp tube installed in combination with my Goldnote DS10 Plus as its source. This pairing opened up the Caspian a bit and surprisingly removed some of the haze and veil as well, but this increase in capability also came at the cost of some bottom end, which was somewhat of a shame as the bottom end of the Caspian is really its best characteristic overall. Still, the Caspian's presentation did vary from amplifier to amplifier, and as such there might be a better match out there. To wrap things up, the Caspian is a slightly overpriced, decent first attempt at a headphone by Apos Audio. Still, is it a headphone that you should invest in? At its current price of $500, my answer for most audiophiles will be no. That is, unless they're after a darker, lusher sounding set in particular, one which sacrifices capabilities for that particular brand of enjoyment. But hey, the Caspian could certainly compete better at a lower price point, and Apos could certainly save some cash by ditching the large, kind of dorky, unnecessary carrying case that comes with this set. That notwithstanding, those who choose to invest in the Caspian will most assuredly benefit from having an additional willingness to experiment with amplification and sourcing in order to find the best possible sonic match for this headphone, as it is somewhat source dependent overall. And who knows, maybe they will have better luck with this headphone than I did. But with that said, Apos Audio has generally been rather supportive of this channel, and no matter what I think of the Caspian, I appreciate them for their kindness, effort, and love of audio. So if the Caspian sound signature sounds like your cup of tea, or if you wish to pick up another item from Apos Audio that they sell, go ahead and use my affiliate link, which I'll share in the description below. Using that link lets Apos know that you support this channel and all the hard work that I do to bring you guys detailed and accurate reviews from a fresh perspective. You can also support Intuit Reviews by following the channel at one of the many other access locations as well, such as the Discord, Twitter, Instagram, www.intuitreviews.com, or by becoming a member of the Patreon. The Patreon access is only $1.50 a month, and it gets you early access to scripts that I use to craft videos. So if you're interested in my first word on a new product, that's where you'll find it more than likely. And per usual, make sure to subscribe here on YouTube if for some reason you haven't done so already, and consider liking this video and or leaving a comment to help out with the always fickle YouTube algorithm. And with that, I'm out for now.